When the sun goes down, the truth comes out, and it's darker than you think. The Marble Refrain. Dr. Sophia Andropoulos first heard the making a song on her 1-3 night time, running on my own in the Acropolis Museum's conservation laboratory. It was 2:47 a.m., and she turned into analyzing a fraction of the Parthenon frieze underneath ultraviolet mild, whilst the voices started out, tender in the beginning, barely audible over the hum of system, but developing regularly louder. A chorus, dozens of voices singing in ancient Greek, the phrases achingly beautiful despite Sophia no longer knowledge the archaic dialect. The melody became haunting, mournful, like a funeral hymn stretched throughout centuries. She eliminated her magnification glasses and listened, seeking to discover the source. The laboratory became in the museum's basement, connected via underground tunnels to the Acropolis itself. Perhaps sound became sporting from the hill above, a few late-night-time ceremony, by using neo-pagan businesses who every now and then sought get entry to. But as the making a song persevered, Sophia found out it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the marble itself. The fragment on her workbench, a piece of the frieze depicting the Panathenaic procession, was vibrating subtly, resonating with the voices. Whilst she touched it, the vibration traveled up her arm, and unexpectedly she understood the phrases. We take into account, we've got constantly remembered. At the same time as you sleep, we sing. Even as you neglect, we maintain. We are the stone that desires of flesh. We're the memory Athens attempted to bury. Sophia jerked her hand lower back, heart pounding. The fragment fell silent. The singing stopped. She was alone in the laboratory with most effective the hum of gadget and her very own fast breathing. She should have left, should have logged the incident as auditory hallucination brought on with the aid of exhaustion. Have to have gone home to her apartment in Plaka and gotten a few sleep. As a substitute, she descended deeper into the museum's garage areas, following corridors she'd been instructed had been closed for structural assessment. The making a song became louder right here, echoing off concrete walls, seeming to come back from everywhere and nowhere. And as Sophia walked, the partitions themselves commenced to trade. Concrete gave manner to limestone. Cutting-edge construction diminished into historical stonework. The LED lighting flickered and died, replaced by means of oil lamps that should not exist but did, their flames casting dancing shadows that moved independently of any breeze. Sophia determined herself in a chamber that regarded on no architectural plans. The partitions had been carved with reliefs displaying production of the Parthenon, people hauling marble blocks, sculptors carving friezes, architects consulting plans. However, the figures within the reliefs had been shifting, their carved forms animated, replaying their historical responsibilities in perpetual loop. And inside the chamber's center stood a lady. She wore the peplos of a classical Athenian, her hair bound in complex braids, rings glittering at her throat and wrists. However, her pores and skin had the translucent first rate of exceptional marble, and whilst she moved, Sophia heard the faint grinding of stone towards stone. Eventually, the lady stated in modern-day Greek, a person who can understand us, a person whose connection to the stones is robust enough to breach the barrier between your time and ours. What are you? Sophia controlled. I'm what stays when perception becomes bone-deep, whilst devotion saturates stone, while worship is so intense it imprints attention on remember itself. The girl gestured on the transferring reliefs. I used to be a priestess of Athena. I served inside the Parthenon for 40 years. When I died, I was buried within the Acropolis's foundation, an honor for trustworthy servants. However, my attention did not disperse. It remained, certain to the stones I might blessed and tended for decades. More figures have been manifesting now, rising from the partitions like water seeping via cracks. Women and men in ancient get dressed, their bureaucracy transferring between flesh and marble, stable and translucent. Loads of them, filling the not-possible chamber. "We are the Acropolis's basis," the priestess persisted. "No longer the physical basis, the religious one. Anyone who served the temples, who achieved rituals, who died in provider to the gods. Our bodies had been buried within the sacred precincts. Our awareness become absorbed by using the stone. We have become a part of the shape itself." Sophia's archaeological schooling warred with what her eyes showed her. "That's impossible. Consciousness requires biological substrate. When the brain dies, awareness ceases. There's no mechanism for..." "Mechanism?" the priestess smiled sadly. "You still suppose in phrases of mechanism, motive and impact, bodily laws, but focus is stranger than your science admits. Whilst belief is powerful enough, whilst devotion runs deep sufficient, when stone is sanctified through centuries of ritual, it turns into greater than mineral. It will become alive in approaches that go beyond biology." The singing resumed, all the figures joining in that equal mournful chorus. And Sophia felt it now not simply heard it, but felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the innermost parts of her recognition. The song changed into vintage past degree, a lament that had been singing because the Parthenon's stones were first laid. "What are you mourning?" she asked. "Athens," the priestess said truly. "The Athens that was, the metropolis that constructed temples to honor the gods, that accrued at the Phoenix to debate philosophy, that sent colonists throughout the Mediterranean spreading Hellenic culture. That Athens died 1,000 years in the past. What exists now wears its call, however, would not recognize its soul." She moved toward Sophia, and the temperature dropped, breath misting in air that were heat moments before. The Acropolis became greater than architecture. It turned into a statement that human beings could create splendor worthy of divine interest, that stone will be carved into paperwork that pleased the gods, that civilization itself became an act of worship. Each column became positioned with sacred geometry. Every frieze depicted mythological truth. Every stone was consecrated via ritual. "And now?" Sophia asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Now it's a visitor appeal, a photo possibility. People come to take selfies, no longer to experience awe. They stroll through the Parthenon checking their phones, now not deliberating the divine. The stones continue to be, but their meaning has been hollowed out." The priestess placed a translucent quit Sophia's coronary heart. "You recognize this. You study the monuments, analyze the marble, file the development. However, do you love them? Do you experience what the authentic builders felt? That growing beauty become an act of devotion, that each chisel strike was a prayer, that structure itself can be a bridge between mortal and divine?" Sophia wanted to mention yes, wanted to claim that her decade of archaeological studies had given her that depth of connection. But status in this impossible chamber, surrounded via the consciousness of historic Athens embedded in stone, she found out her relationship with the Acropolis have been medical. Expert. She'd studied it without virtually seeing it. "Teach me," she stated. "Display me what you see, what the stones consider." The priestess smiled, and it converted her marble functions with unexpected warmth. "Are you certain? Once you understand the Acropolis as we do, you may by no means go back to seeing it as mere ruins. You'll carry this awareness for the relaxation of your life. It will change the whole lot." "I'm positive." The priestess's hand pressed harder towards Sophia's chest, and all of a sudden the sector inverted. Sophia noticed the Acropolis as it had been in its glory, every shape intact, painted in exquisite colorations that scholars suspected, however vacationers by no means imagined. The Parthenon's columns had been red and blue, its pediments alive with gilt statues. The Propylaea gates gleamed with bronze. The temple of Athena Nike perched at the doorway like a jewel box, its tiny perfection balanced against the Parthenon's big scale. And everywhere, human beings, hundreds of them, monks acting rituals, residents making services, philosophers debating within the shade of the columns, children playing inside the courtyards. The Acropolis wasn't a museum. It became alive, functioning, the sacred and secular interpenetrating in ways modern-day Athens had forgotten. Sophia saw the development, many years of hard work, thousands of people, marble blocks hauled from Penteli, sculptors carving friezes that might take years to complete. She saw the willpower right in 438 BCE, the big procession bringing the cult statue of Athena to its new home, the metropolis celebrating completion of a venture that had fed on a technology. She noticed wars, the Peloponnesian battle devastation, the Macedonian conquest, the Roman profession. She saw transformation, the Parthenon becoming a church within the 6th century CE, a mosque in the 1400s. She saw destruction, the Venetian explosion of 1687 that gutted the structure, killing masses of human beings sheltering inside, scattering irreplaceable sculptures throughout the hilltop. She noticed theft, Lord Elgin's men sawing friezes from the walls, loading them onto ships, casting off the Parthenon's decorative program to decorate a British museum. She saw the outrage of Greeks looking their background stolen, the helplessness of a colonized human beings unable to save you the looting. And through it all, she felt the consciousness inside the stones, looking, remembering, mourning every loss, each transformation, every step far from the sacred purpose for which the temples have been built. The imaginative and prescient ended. Sophia gasped, locating herself returned in the impossible chamber, tears streaming down her face even though she could not say why. The weight of 500 years pressed against her focus, each prayer spoken at the Acropolis, each providing maid, every moment of awe experienced by way of hundreds of thousands across the centuries. "You notice now," the priestess stated gently. "You understand what changed into lost. No longer just stones but meaning. Now not just homes but reason. The Acropolis become constructed as a bridge to the divine. Current Athens has grew to become it right into a monument to the past, lovely however dead, popular but not simply commemorated." "Can it's restored?" Sophia asked. "Can the sacred be recovered?" "Possibly, but not via archaeology. No longer via restoration or conservation or instructional study. The ones keep the physical structures whilst ignoring what made them effective. To in reality repair the Acropolis, you would want to repair belief. Make people keep in mind that those stones are alive with reminiscence, that taking walks amongst them is communion with something extra than themselves." The priestess looked at Sophia with an intensity that became nearly bodily. "It truly is why we've been calling you. Why the stones sang to you. Why you are standing here perceiving what no one else can see. You've got the information, the platform, the credibility to inform our story. To give an explanation for that the Acropolis isn't always simply architectural records. It's conscious reminiscence embedded in marble, cognizance that has endured for millennia, connection to the divine that in no way clearly died." "No one could agree with me," Sophia stated. "I would be dismissed as delusional. My career could be destroyed. The educational network would." "Would suppose you've misplaced your mind," the priestess agreed. "Sure. However, some would pay attention. A few would go to the Acropolis in a different way, searching out what you found, establishing themselves to perceiving what the stones do not forget. And that's all we need. Sufficient humans believing, sufficient focus targeted on the sacred, sufficient awareness that this location is extra than ruins. That might be enough to bolster our presence, to allow us to show up more easily, to remind Athens what it is forgotten." Sophia idea of her studies, her courses, her reputation. Notion of what she'd sacrifice with the aid of claiming the Acropolis was alive with historical focus. That marble may want to consider. That walking amongst ruins turned into communion with the embedded cognizance of absolutely everyone who'd ever worshipped there. But she also idea of what she'd experienced. The imaginative and prescient of Athens in its glory. The load of accumulated reminiscence, the understanding that those stones held memories that transcended educational analysis. Could she go back to scientific research after experiencing that? Should she reduce the Acropolis to measurements and chemical analysis while she knew it became so much greater? "I will strive," she said. "I will record what I've skilled, post it. Let human beings decide whether or not to consider. However, I cannot assure." "We realize," the priestess interrupted. "We're asking you to try, not to be triumphant. The rest is up to Athens, to Greece, to all of the people who visit this location in search of connection to something extra than themselves. We can only offer the reality. Whether or not anybody accepts it's far beyond our manage." The chamber started to fade, the impossible architecture dissolving back into modern concrete, the oil lamps turning into LED furnishings. The figures of historic Athenians grew translucent, returning to the stone from which they had emerged. "Wait," Sophia said. "How do I locate you once more?" "How do I?" "Pay attention to the stones," the priestess said, her voice already remote. "They may be constantly singing. You just need to recollect a way to pay attention them." Then Sophia was by myself in a basement hall of the Acropolis Museum, status in front of a concrete wall marked "Structural Evaluation, No Access." The door became sealed, had seemingly been sealed for months, but she just walked through it, just spent time in a chamber that existed outside ordinary area, simply conversed with awareness that shouldn't exist. She returned to the laboratory, her arms shaking as she logged out of the PC structures and gathered her belongings. The marble fragment was still on her workbench, the piece of frieze she'd been reading. It became inert now, just stone, displaying no signs and symptoms of the vibration she'd felt in advance. However, whilst she touched it, she heard, faint but gift, that chorus singing, the marble remembering. The stones dreaming of the flesh they'd once sheltered, the rituals that they had as soon as hosted, the sacred cause they had as soon as served. Sophia left the museum as dawn broke over Athens. The Acropolis rose above the metropolis, the Parthenon visible on its hilltop throne, white marble sparkling in early light. Tourists would soon flood the web page, cameras equipped, guidebooks explaining the architecture and records. But Sophia saw something else now. Saw the cognizance embedded in those stones, the attention that had continued for 2,500 years, the reminiscence of what the Acropolis had been when it turned into alive with worship and awe. She could return to her research. Should foe this night time had never passed off, that she'd experienced not anything extra than exhaustion-induced hallucination. Should retain her career reading marble as mineral rather than as vessel for cognizance. Or she should honor what she'd been shown. Ought to write about the Acropolis not as damage, but as dwelling monument, now not as archaeological web page, however, as space, wherein the boundary among past and present remained permeable, wherein those willing to listen could nevertheless listen the refrain of ancient Athens singing its everlasting music. Sophia climbed the Acropolis because the sun rose better, becoming a member of the first vacationers ascending the ancient steps. At the Parthenon, she placed her hand against a column and felt it, the subtle vibration, the warm temperature in stone that ought to be cold, the focus that slept in marble anticipating someone to don't forget it became there. The priestess have been right. Sophia should in no way see the Acropolis as mere ruins once more. She carried recognition now that would alternate the whole thing, her research, her publications, her understanding of what archaeology could be when it recounted that a few stones held extra than records. Round her, tourists photographed the columns. Guides recited dates and facts. The secular machinery of historical past tourism proceeded as it usually had. However, underneath it all, Sophia heard the making a song. The marble refrain performing its eternal lament, mourning the Athens that become, maintaining the memory of what had been misplaced, ready patiently for the day when a person might remember the fact that the Acropolis wasn't dead. It turned into handiest snoozing. And it is able to wake again, if enough human beings had been inclined to listen to what the stones remembered. The Watchers of Rapa Nui. Dr. Caroline Fisher had been reading the Moai of Easter Island for 3 months when she realized they were all going through the wrong route. No longer the famous ones at Ahutangariki or Rano Raraku, the ones confronted inland as predicted, looking over the island with their enigmatic stone expressions. But the 15 Moai her crew had observed on the western coast, half of buried in volcanic soil, confronted outward, towards the ocean. In the direction of not anything but 3,000 kilometers of empty Pacific. "They are guardians," she instructed her graduate student Mateo as they excavated across the first statue's base. The islanders located them to look at the ocean, but looking for what? Mateo, a Chilean of Rapa Nui descent, failed to solution without delay. He'd been quiet for the reason that they had began paintings on this website, his regular enthusiasm dampened with the aid of something Caroline could not identify. Subsequently, he stated, "My grandmother instructed me stories about the Moai that face away. She stated they are now not looking. They're keeping something lower back." Conserving returned what? She would not say, just that some statues were carved to look at over the people, but others had been carved to maintain watch, to make certain sure matters stayed wherein they belonged, within the ocean, in the deep locations, away from the island. Caroline had brushed off it as folklore. Nearby legend attached to mysterious statues that generations of Rapa Nui had struggled to provide an explanation for. However now, standing beside the primary completely excavated Moai, as sundown painted the Pacific in shades of blood and fireplace, she felt the burden of these empty stone eyes turned towards the horizon. The statue changed into massive, over 10 meters tall, 40 lots of compressed volcanic tuff. Its capabilities were sharper than the inland Moai, greater aggressive. The traditional topknot changed with what gave the look of a warrior's helmet. And carved into its again, invisible until excavation discovered it, have been symbols Caroline didn't recognize from any Polynesian way of life she'd studied. She photographed them as mild dwindled, her digicam flash stark towards the weathered stone. The symbols appeared to writhe within the shifting illumination, forming styles that hurt to take a look at without delay, geometry that didn't quite make feel in 3 dimensions. "We need to cover it," Mateo said, his voice tight. "And tomorrow, it's getting darkish. Only a few greater pictures. I need to capture those markings earlier than..." The Moai moved. Not dramatically, only a diffused shift, a rotation of possibly 5 ranges, stone grinding in opposition to stone as the big statue turned its face in addition towards the sea. Caroline stumbled backward, coronary heart hammering, sure she'd imagined it. Statues didn't move. 40 tons of carved rock did not rotate on its own. But whilst she checked out her pics, comparing them to what she saw now, the perspective became exceptional, unmistakably different. The Moai had turned. "We're leaving," Mateo stated, already packing device. "Now, earlier than it gets completely darkish." "Mateo, wait. We need to report this. Installation monitoring gadget. If there may be seismic activity causing." "It is no longer seismic activity." His voice changed into sharp with fear. "My grandmother warned me. She stated if the western Moai ever moved, if they became an addition closer to the ocean, it intended they were failing. That what they have been protecting returned was getting more potent. That we ought to go away the island immediately." "This is superstition." "Is it? You just noticed a 40-ton statue move. You're standing here looking to rationalize it, to match it into your instructional framework. But maybe, Dr. Fisher, your framework would not account for the whole thing. Perhaps the Rapa Nui knew things your technology hasn't located." Caroline desired to argue, however movement at the edge of her vision stopped her. The alternative 14 Moai, formerly motionless silhouettes in opposition to the darkening sky, were turning too. All of them, synchronously, rotating to stand extra at once in the direction of the sea. The grinding of stone in opposition to soil created a legitimate like the earth itself groaning in ache. And from the ocean, something spoke back. No longer a valid exactly, more like a stress wave, a vibration felt within the chest as opposed to heard with the ears. The Pacific seemed to darken, shadows spreading across the water despite the sunset's closing light. And in those shadows, Caroline saw shapes. Huge shapes, moving under the surface, circling the island at a distance of possibly kilometers. "What is that?" she whispered. What the Moai were built to watch, to defend towards, to avoid the island through a few method my ancestors understood but we've forgotten. Matteo grabbed her arm. "We want to depart, want to get to Hangaroa, acquire every person, find a way off the island. Because if the Moai are failing, in the event that they cannot maintain it returned anymore." The nearest form broke the floor. Caroline's thoughts refused to system what she saw. It became too huge, too wrong, existing in too many dimensions concurrently. She stuck impressions, tentacles that had been additionally wings, eyes that had been additionally mouths, scales that shifted between solid count number and something else, something that mild exceeded via and changed into basically changed via the passage. The creature, if it changed into a creature, sang. The sound bypassed Caroline's ears completely, resonating without delay in her bones, her blood, the electrical firing of her neurons. And in that song, she understood. The Moai weren't symbols of ancestors or demonstrations of cultural achievement. They were anchors, focal points for a binding that the historic Rapa Nui had created, one way or the other, through methods misplaced to time. A barrier that saved positive things, matters that had existed inside the Pacific on the grounds that before humans, considering the fact that before mammals, due to the fact before existence had crawled from the oceans, from drawing near the island, from accomplishing the land, from spreading to the continents past. And that barrier changed into failing. "How can we repair it?" Caroline asked, forcing the phrases through a throat tight with terror. "The binding, how will we enhance it?" "I don't know. The information became misplaced whilst the island collapsed, whilst the environment failed and the population crashed. My grandmother stated there have been as soon as monks who understood the Moai's true cause, who achieved rituals to keep the binding. But they died centuries ago. The statues have been weakening ever for the reason that the barrier slowly failing, and nobody alive is aware of how to restore it." Greater shapes had been surfacing now, dozens of them circling closer. The Moai continued their sluggish rotation, still seeking to fulfill their cause. However, Caroline ought to see cracks spreading across their faces, fissures commencing in stone that had stood for hundreds of years. The statues have been failing, their shape breaking below the strain of retaining back something that become eventually, inexorably, breaking through. "The symbols," Caroline stated all at once, taking into account the carvings on the Moai's lower back. "The ones that do not suit any known Polynesian lifestyle, perhaps their commands, a report of the way the binding works." She ran back to the excavated Moai, pulled out her digicam, scrolling via the photos of the symbols. In the accumulating darkness, they appeared to glow faintly, phosphorescent like deep-sea creatures. And as she studied them, her archaeologist's training in sample recognition engaged, she began to look shape. Not language precisely, but something adorate, a symbolic machine encoding data. The symbols described a ritual. Not in words, but in pure concept. That means transmitted without delay to the observer's thoughts. Caroline noticed what the ancient Rapa Nui had performed, accumulated on the western shore at some point of a specific astronomical alignment, used the statues as focal points for a collective running of will and notion, and something else, something human beings had as soon as been able to, however, had considering that forgotten. They'd shore the ocean, put a wall of conscious aim between the island and what lived in the deep locations. And they might anchored that wall to the Moai, making the statues no longer simply representations of the binding but actual components of it, their stone bureaucracy protecting back terrors that predated humanity's emergence from the ocean. "We cannot do this," Caroline said, understanding crystallizing. "The ritual required hundreds of people, all targeted on the equal purpose, all believing in reality in their electricity to keep again the deep. We're people. We don't even properly consider it's actual." "Then we die," Matteo said certainly, "together with all and sundry on the island. And while those things reach the continents, when they unfold past the Pacific, all of us else dies too. Due to the fact anything my ancestors bound right here, something they kept contained through the Moai, it's not supposed for a global with human beings in it. It's from earlier then, from when the Earth turned into one of a kind. And if it escapes fully, it'll make the world one of a kind again, make it incorrect for us. Caroline checked out the shapes circling within the darkening water. More were arriving, dozens turning into masses, a giant congregation of things that shouldn't exist, but did, drawn by the weakening barrier, sensing their opportunity to eventually destroy free from the containment that had held them for hundreds of years. She thought of her educational career, her rational worldview, her certainty that truth operated in line with understandable legal guidelines. It all appeared absurd now, dealing with evidence of things that transcended traditional expertise. The universe becomes stranger than her technological know-how admitted. Cognizance may want to have an effect on rely in ways physics did not acknowledge, and historic peoples had regarded truths that modernity had brushed off as superstition. "Display me," she stated to Matteo. "Show me everything your grandmother instructed you. Each story, every legend, each piece of Rapa Nui subculture that might assist. We're going to attempt to reconstruct the ritual. Maybe it won't work. Maybe we don't have sufficient humans or enough belief or enough know-how, but we should attempt." They worked through the night time, Matteo sharing oral traditions passed down through his circle of relatives at the same time as Caroline cross-referenced them along with her archaeological know-how, trying to separate literal education from symbolic story. With the aid of Dawn, they'd something. Now not a complete ritual, but fragments, portions they hoped might be sufficient. The subsequent step became gathering human beings. Matteo contacted spouse and children in Hangaroa, defined the scenario without going into details that could sound insane. Caroline, known as her fellow researchers at the island, framing it as an emergency archaeological documentation, requiring community participation. A few human beings got here out of curiosity, others out of admire for Matteo's own family. Nevertheless, others because they had visible the shapes within the water and knew something incorrect was happening. Via midday, they had 43 human beings collected on the western shore, status a number of the 15 moai that endured their sluggish rotation, cracks spreading throughout their faces because the binding failed incrementally, degree by diploma. "What we're trying might not make experience," Caroline told the assembled organization. "It's going to seem like superstition or theater or insanity, but I need you to consider us. Your ancestors, Rapa Nui ancestors, created those statues for a particular purpose. Now not as artwork, not as monuments, but as functional objects. And that characteristic is failing. We want to repair it." She defined the ritual as nice she understood it, forming a circle across the moai, focusing collective will at the boundary between land and sea, believing clearly that recognition ought to affect reality, that human intention ought to create boundaries, with the intention to was a pressure as real as gravity or electromagnetism. The general public seemed skeptical. A few seemed fearful. But Matteo's grandmother, a girl in her 1980s who'd walked from Hangaroa no matter her age, nodded slowly. "My grandmother advised me the equal," she said in Spanish-accented English. "The moai are anchors, the humans are the energy. Collectively, we preserve back what should no longer contact the land. It's our responsibility, our purpose. The motive Rapa Nui exists at all, no longer as home for human beings, but as prison for what lives under." Her fact appeared to persuade others. Or possibly they truly diagnosed they had no higher alternative, with the shapes within the water now actually visible even in daytime, circling nearer, trying out the weakening barrier. The ritual started out at sundown, the equal time Caroline had first visible the moai flow. 43 humans stood in a circle across the statues, conserving palms, inhaling unison. Caroline spoke the phrases she'd translated from the symbols, now not a language she knew, however something older, something that felt like it had way past, which means, just like the sounds themselves affected reality. In the beginning, nothing befell. Humans shifted uncomfortably, maintained the circle out of politeness, however, without a doubt doubting. Caroline felt her very own skepticism growing. This became absurd. 50 human beings keeping fingers would not prevent monsters from the deep. Awareness couldn't create bodily boundaries. She'd allow worry and exhaustion override rational notion. Then Matteo's grandmother started out to sing. It was a traditional Rapa Nui chant, one Caroline had heard earlier but by no means simply listened to. Now, in this context, she heard layers beneath the melody, harmonics that shouldn't be present, frequencies that resonated with something past human vocal cords. The vintage female's voice carried power that transcended extent, every notice touchdown with effect Caroline felt in her chest. Others joined the song, folks who knew it coaching those who failed to, the mantra constructing in complexity and strength. And as they sang, Caroline saw it, mild emanating from the moai, now not meditated but generated, the statues glowing from within as if the volcanic stone turned into becoming incandescent. The barrier become rebuilding. She could see it now, seen simplest when approached with the right attitude, the right openness to possibilities past traditional physics. A wall of pure gold, woven from the collective will of all of us present, anchored to the moai, spreading outward towards the sea. The creatures inside the water felt it too. They surged ahead, attempting to interrupt through earlier than the barrier ought to fully set up, tentacles and wings and impossible geometries thrashing towards the boundary among land and sea. The impact was visible as distortions in area, as though fact itself changed into being torn in which the creatures met the barrier. But the barrier held, bolstered, drove the creatures back meter by means of meter, pushing them far from the island, away from the possibility of accomplishing land. The moai blazed brighter, their cracks sealing, their rotation revering as they became again to their right positions, now not watching the ocean anymore, but preserving it separate, maintaining the division between what belonged on land and what belonged in the deep places where people ought to never move. The ritual lasted hours. Human beings collapsed from exhaustion, had been changed by others who'd heard them making a song and come to help. Word unfold via Hangaroa, and greater humans arrived, islanders and researchers, travelers and locals, every person who should make it to the western shore joining the circle, including their will to the collective operating. Through midnight, it turned into achieved. The barrier turned into restored, stronger than it had been in centuries, anchored so deeply to the moai and to the island itself that it would keep for generations. The creatures had been gone, driven return to the depths, contained over again in the prison the ancient Rapa Nui had built for them. Caroline collapsed beside one of the moai, her body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. The statue became cool stone again, not glowing, but she ought to experience something inside it now, no longer life precisely, but focus. Cause. The moai wasn't simply rock. It changed into recognition given shape, human aim made stable, the desire to protect transformed into be counted that would stand for centuries. "We did it," Matteo said, sitting beside her. "We without a doubt did it. We reconstructed the ritual, restored the binding. But Matteo, we cannot permit this expertise die once more. Cannot let the barrier weaken till we're having this communication again in any other century." Caroline checked out the people scattered throughout the shore, exhausted but alive, having participated in something that transcended everyday revel in. "We need to set up a culture, a exercise. People who recognize what the moai really are, who hold the barrier, who maintain the deep matters contained." "A priesthood," Matteo's grandmother said, drawing near slowly. "That is what we had earlier then. Professionals who understood the binding, who accomplished everyday rituals to bolster it, who surpassed the knowledge down via generations. Whilst the island collapsed, while our populace crashed and our subculture fractured, we lost that continuity. However, we can rebuild it now. Need to rebuild it because the barrier may not preserve all the time without preservation." Over the subsequent months, it's exactly what they did. Caroline stayed on Easter Island, her academic profession transformed from traditional archaeology to something else, reading the interface between focus and be counted, documenting how collective notion could affect truth, studying from Rapa Nui traditions how historic peoples had understood truths that present-day science was handiest beginning to glimpse. Matteo have become one of the first new clergymen, mastering the rituals, teaching others, establishing practices that would ensure the barrier's upkeep. The island's authorities, presented with proof of what lived under the Pacific, quietly supported the program, recognizing that Easter Island served a motive beyond tourism. it turned into humanity's first line of protection towards things that ought to stay within the deep. Now, not all people believed. The general public who heard the story disregarded it as difficult hoax or shared fantasy or misinterpretation of natural phenomena. However, individuals who'd been there, who'd participated within the ritual, who'd visible the barrier rebuild and the creatures pushed again, they knew. They carried that expertise like a weight, understanding that the sector becomes stranger and greater risky than most people imagined. And the Moai stood watch, 15 statues going through the Western Sea, maintaining again terrors that had existed earlier than humanity and might exist after, serving their proper purpose at ultimate. Not monuments to dead ancestors, however lively guardians status everlasting vigil over a barrier that have to by no means be allowed to fail again. Caroline visited them regularly, placing her hand towards the cool stone, feeling the awareness inside. Now not individual recognition, but collective motive, the centered will of everybody who'd participated within the binding, anchored to volcanic rock that might stand for millennia. "Thank you," she whispered to the statues, "for holding, for enduring, for retaining us safe from what we by no means knew threatened us." The Moai failed to solution, but of their silent stone faces, Caroline noticed what she'd in no way perceived earlier than now not enigmatic thriller or artistic achievement, but grim willpower. Those weren't sculptures supposed to encourage awe. They have been squatties on everlasting deployment, warriors standing watch over the front line that couldn't be deserted, guardians that could maintain their positions until the stone itself crumbled. And so long as humans remembered their cause, so long as the rituals were maintained and the barrier strengthened, they would maintain. The deep matters could remain below, and the world above would never know how close it had come to being reclaimed by what had owned the oceans first. The Rose Crimson Town. Dr. Layla Hassan were mapping the unexcavated sections of Petra for 6 weeks whilst she found the passage that seemed on no survey. It was hidden behind a collapsed facade within the outer sick, found out handiest when afternoon mild hit the sandstone at a precise attitude, displaying seams that should not exist in what appeared to be stable rock. "Ahmed, have a look at this," she known as to her Jordanian colleague, who become documenting tomb structures 50 meters away. The passage turned into narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze via sideways, and descended at a steep attitude into the mountain. The walls were carved with the identical precision as Petra's famous facades, however the symbols had been wrong. No longer Nabatean, now not Greek or Roman, something older, angular script that hurt Layla's eyes when she attempted to awareness on it. "We shouldn't pass in without right system," Ahmed stated, even though his voice carried more unease than professional caution. "Without authorization from the branch of antiquities, this may be structurally unsound. Only a quick look. Record the entrance, test balance, see if it connects to acknowledged systems." Layla changed into already pulling out her headlamp. 2 decades of archaeological enjoy told her this was large, an undiscovered passage in one of the International's most studied websites. Her career could be defined with the aid of what lay past this entrance. She need to have listened to the warning in Ahmed's voice. The passage descended for 30 meters, the wall's ultimate in till Layla had to crawl, her breath echoing within the constrained area. Then it opened into a chamber that must now not exist. It turned into substantial, as a minimum 50 meters across, carved completely from the rose crimson sandstone. But not like Petra's tombs and temples above, this area confirmed no signs and symptoms of weathering, no erosion from water or wind. The partitions were perfect, as though carved the day before today, included ground to ceiling with extra of those angular symbols that made Layla's imaginative and prescient blur whilst regarded at once. And within the chamber's middle stood a pool of water. No longer a cistern or water series system, Petra had dozens of those. This becomes specific. The water was really still, reflecting nothing notwithstanding Layla's headlamp shining directly on its surface. It absorbed mild absolutely, a circle of pure black within the middle of the rose-pink chamber. "Dr. Hassan," Ahmed's voice came from the passage in the back of her, remote and distorted. "Are you all proper? You've been down there for 40 mins." 40 mins? Layla checked her watch, careworn. She'd entered possibly 5 minutes ago. But the show confirmed 4:47 p.m. She'd descended at 4:05. Time had slipped. "Coming lower back," she referred to as. However, her voice died inside the still air, absorbed by the black water and the symbols at the partitions. She photographed the whole lot speedy, the chamber, the pool, the symbols, and retreated to the passage. Crawling again up felt longer than the descent, the walls pressing closer, the perspective steeper. By the point she emerged, gasping, into the outer sick, the sun was setting, portray the sandstone in sunglasses of blood and hearth. "You have been down there for 3 hours, Ahmed stated, his face tight with worry. "I was approximately to call for help. What did you find?" "A chamber, pre-Nabatean, I assume, maybe Edomite. The symbols do not healthy any regarded script from this place." Layla pulled out her camera, scrolling through the snapshots. "Examine this. The precision is top-notch, and that pool." The pics confirmed not anything. Each picture of the chamber interior was black, as if the digital camera had malfunctioned. Simplest the passage entrance became visible, or even that regarded incorrect. The angles skewed, the perspective distorted in ways that made Layla's head ache. "Gadget failure," she said, though her digital camera were operating flawlessly earlier than and after. "I will go return the next day with higher lights, backup cameras." "No," Ahmed's voice turned into sharp. "Dr. Hassan, I need to inform you something. Approximately that section of the sick, nearby humans avoid it, have prevented it for generations. They are saying it's cursed, that folks who input the forbidden passages do not come return the same. That the antique metropolis, the only that existed before the Nabateans, before even the Edomites, still exists down there, snoozing, and some sleepers should not be woken. This is folklore, superstition meant to preserve people away from risky regions." "Is it? You misplaced 3 hours in 5 mins. Your camera malfunctioned and approaches cameras don't malfunction. And have a look at your fingers." Layla regarded down. Her palms had been covered in fine pink dirt, the exclusive rose-colored sandstone of Petra. But it wasn't dirt. The particles had been shifting, crawling across her pores and skin like dwelling matters, burrowing into her pores. She attempted to brush them away, however they clung, merging along with her pores and skin, disappearing beneath the surface. "What is this?" She rubbed frantically, but the purple saved spreading, creeping up her wrists like a stain. "The city claiming you, marking you as someone who's been under, a person who has touched what have to stay hidden." Ahmed grabbed a water bottle, poured it over her hands. The pink dirt hissed on touch with water, steam rising, but it failed to wash away. It sank deeper, till Layla may want to see faint rose-colored veins under her pores and skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. That night, in her hotel room in Wadi Musa, Layla dreamed. She walked through Petra, however no longer the Petra that existed now. This was the city in its glory, no longer Nabatean glory, however something earlier than. The facades had been complete, painted in colorings archaeology recommended, however never proved. Deep reds and golds and blues that shimmered like oil on water. The streets were crowded with humans sporting clothing from no recognized culture. Speak me within the angular language from the symbols, their voices resonating with harmonics that made reality ripple. And anywhere, the water, no longer in cisterns or channels, however flowing brazenly via the streets, up the cliff faces, defying gravity, pooling in not possible places. Black water that pondered nothing, that absorbed everything, that whispered in voices older than human speech. Layla followed the water to its source, the chamber she'd discovered. Besides, now it became a temple. The pool in its middle became large, deeper, and things moved under its floor. No longer fish or different aquatic life, however shapes that existed in dimensions Layla's eyes could not nicely perceive. They pressed upward in opposition to the water's surface, distorting it like material stretched over reaching palms, attempting to interrupt through into the world above. "The gate should continue to be closed," a voice stated behind her. Layla turned to see a female in problematic gowns, face painted with symbols that matched the ones at the chamber partitions. This is why the metropolis become carved, no longer as tombs or temples or monuments to kings, as weights. Lots of heaps of labored stone urgent down at the gate, maintaining it sealed, stopping what lies under from emerging. "What lies underneath?" Layla requested, although she may want to see them in the pool. Massive entities that made the chamber feel small, cognizance so alien that perceiving even their edges brought about her thoughts to fracture. The primary carvers, those who shaped the earth earlier than humans found out to use equipment, before mammals crawled from the ocean. They carved the arena's foundations, hollowed out spaces underneath mountains, created passages among layers of reality. This became considered one of their works, a gate connecting the deep places to the floor. Whilst our ancestors determined it, they understood it should be sealed, in order that they carved the metropolis, made Petra no longer a living but a lid. The female gestured at the chamber partitions, at symbols that had been instructions and warnings, and the fossilized attention of all of us who'd ever labored to maintain the seal. But lids may be lifted, seals can weaken, and you, Layla Hassan, you've touched the gate. Permit the metropolis mark you, you're sure to it now. You'll maintain the seal whether or not you pick out to or no longer. Layla woke gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat. The veins underneath her skin glowed faintly within the darkness, rose-crimson light pulsing together with her heartbeat. She ought to feel Petra now, not simply do not forget traveling it, however feel it, as if the town became an extension of her own body. Every carved facade, each tomb, each temple. And beneath all of it, she felt the gate, felt the strain of what driven towards it from underneath. She known as Ahmed at 3 a.m. I want to go again, need to recognize what is going on to me. The chamber, the symbols, they are no longer just archaeological artifacts. They're useful, lively. The town is alive in ways we do not renowned. I know, Ahmed stated quietly. My grandfather changed into marked too. He spent 40 years studying Petra, documenting it. However, his actual paintings changed into maintenance, ensuring the seal held, making sure the weight of the carved stone saved urgent down at the gate. He tried to provide an explanation for it to me before he died. However, I concept it was dementia, age affecting his thoughts. Now I recognize he was telling the truth. How many humans realize? A few, locals often. A few archaeologists who have been here long enough to look the styles. The Chamber of Trade would not want it publicized, bad for tourism. However, the ones people with own family records in Wadi Musa, we understand. Petra serves a purpose beyond background maintenance. It's humanity's weight on a door that have to live closed. Layla checked out her sparkling veins, felt the city pulsing in her focus. What do I do? Study, observe, recognize what the historical carvers knew. The symbols in that chamber, they're a manual. Instructions for preserving the seal. Your grandfather's notes are in my workplace. I will carry them day after today. But Dr. Hassan, you need to simply accept this. You're no longer just an archaeologist anymore. You're a dad or mom. And Petra is your duty now until you locate someone to update you or till the gate in the end opens and none of this matters anymore. Over the following weeks, Layla descended into obsession. She mapped every passage, every chamber, every carved space in Petra, understanding now that each one served a purpose. The well-known facades weren't just decorative. They had been complex machines made from geometry and mass, their weight exactly calculated to press down on specific factors of the gate underneath. The treasury, with its complicated Hellenistic facade, sat immediately above the chamber Layla had located, its lots of lots centered on keeping the pool sealed. The monastery, carved high inside the cliffs, anchored the northern edge of the gate. The royal tombs marked different stress points, a community of labored stone keeping again what wanted to emerge. And the symbols, Layla could read them now, the angular script making Phelan approaches everyday language in no way could. They defined the primary carvers now not as gods or extraterrestrial beings, however, as the Earth's unique awareness that predated biology, that had fashioned geology itself. The gates they had carved weren't doorways, but wounds, places wherein their realm pressed too close to the floor, in which the boundary between deep earth and shallow earth grew dangerously skinny. The Nabateans hadn't constructed Petra. They had inherited it from earlier peoples who'd understood what wished sealing. They delivered to it, subtle it, made it greater, problematic, but the center cause remained. Each structure became a weight. Every carving strengthened the seal. The entire town was a system designed for one motive: maintaining the gate closed. However, machines require maintenance. And for the past century, as Petra had converted from living city to archaeological site to vacationer appeal, that renovation had lapsed. The seal was weakening. Layla felt it via the rose-red veins under her pores and skin. Felt strain building, the gate straining against its bonds, cracks spreading through the seal. Not dramatic breaks, this became geological time working on human schedules, but inexorable. In another 50 years, possibly much less, the burden of Petra might be inadequate. The gate could open, and what emerged might transform the floor world into something else. "We need to feature greater weight," she instructed Ahmed, spreading her studies throughout his office. "More carved stone, extra structures, improve the sections displaying the most pressure." With what money? What authorization? The Jordanian government slightly finances primary protection. You speak me about predominant creation in a UNESCO Global Heritage webpage. The allows alone would take a long time. Then we do it ourselves, quietly. Small additions that appear to be restoration, however, truly upload strategic mass. Layla pointed to her maps, displaying stress factors in the seal. Here, here, and right here. We upload stone, give a boost to foundations, shore up areas showing weak point. Traditional techniques, traditional materials. Make it appear like historic preservation while surely stopping catastrophe. Ahmed studied the maps, his expression. This isn't always archaeology anymore. That is something else. Something I am now not positive we are qualified for. Then who else is aware of what Petra sincerely is? Who else can feel the gate weakening? Layla's veins pulsed brighter, rose-pink, mild, visible even within the workplace's fluorescent glare. I didn't ask for this, didn't want to be marked. However, I touched the gate and now I'm responsible. We are responsible. Over the following year, they labored. Small tasks disguised as archaeological recovery, strategic additions that looked like ancient reconstruction, but simply bolstered the seal. They recruited others, locals who'd acknowledged the reality, archaeologists who'd been marked like Layla, even some tourists who'd sensed something wrong with Petra, who'd felt the gate through the rose-red stone and understood that something needed protecting lower back. It became never sufficient. For every strain point they shored up, two more seemed. The gate became awakening, responding to the cutting-edge world's presence, to the hundreds of tourists who walked over it day by day without understanding, their weight insufficient, however their focus considerable. The primary carvers were attracted to awareness like moths to flame. Humanity's presence above turned into calling them, inviting them, making them curious approximately the surface global that they had abandoned eons ago. Layla stood within the chamber in which it had all started, searching on the black pool that had multiplied when you consider that her first go-to. It became 2 times as huge now, the water stage growing, things underneath the floor pressing toward breaking through. The symbols at the partitions pulsed with caution, ancient instructions cycling faster, urgency constructing of their angular geometry. "We are now not going to maintain it," she said to Ahmed, who descended together with her, his personal hands now marked with rose-crimson veins. "Now not with stone by myself. The primary carvers are too robust, too patient, too inevitable. They formed the earth. What risk can we have of retaining them contained? Then what will we do? Allow them to emerge. Allow them to reclaim the surface." "No." Layla placed her hand against the symbols, felt them responding to her contact, felt the town's awareness reaching through the stone into her cognizance. "We grow to be part of the seal ourselves. The historic peoples understood this, that some boundaries required conscious will, no longer simply physical mass. It's why they marked humans, why they created guardians. We do not just maintain the seal, we're the seal." She should see it now in the symbols. Instructions now not for production but for transformation. For taking human recognition and weaving it into the stone, making human beings into a part of Petra's structure, their cognizance introduced to the load urgent down on the gate. The historic guardians had executed this, dozens of them over millennia, their attention nonetheless present in the rose-red sandstone, still watching, nevertheless conserving. "You are speak me about dying," Ahmed said, "about letting ourselves be absorbed into the city. I'm talking about serving a purpose greater than individual existence, about becoming part of something to be able to endure. The first carvers suppose in geological time, hundreds of thousands of years. We cannot combat that with human lifespans. But if we upload our attention to the seal, if we end up a part of the weight retaining them returned, we'd purchase humanity a few greater centuries. Time to develop era that would permanently seal the gate. Time to discover better answers than sacrificing humans to maintain, return the deep." Ahmed becomes silent for a long time, searching on the black pool at the shapes pressing upward from beneath. Finally, "My grandfather did this. That's why he spent 40 years in Petra, now not reading it, however merging with it. By the end, he couldn't go away. Said the city wished him an excessive amount of. We idea it changed into obsession. It changed into transformation. I'm sorry, I failed to suggest to pull you into this. You did not. I was born into it. My circle of relatives has guarded Petra for generations, even though we forgot why till lately. This is my inheritance, my responsibility." He smiled sadly. "At the least I will come to be a part of something stunning. The rose-red town, one too as vintage as time, no longer a awful legacy." They spent the next month preparing, analyzing the symbols, expertise the transformation technique, saying goodbye to lives that would give up but also persist, individual life dissolving into collective cause. Others joined them, 3 archaeologists who'd been marked, 2 locals whose households had guarded Petra for hundreds of years, even a visitor who'd felt the decision and understood what become wanted. 7 people willing to grow to be stone, to feature their consciousness to the load pressing down at the gate, to convert from flesh into the everlasting vigilance that Petra represented. The ritual occurred at the hours of darkness, within the chamber underneath the treasury. They gathered across the black pool, fingers related, speaking phrases from the symbols, not a language however pure, which means standards that affected fact at once. The rose-crimson veins below their pores and skin blazed brighter, spreading, protecting their bodies in luminous tracery that matched the styles on Petra's facades. And slowly, they began a trade. Flesh hardened into sandstone, blood becoming the rose-red shade that described Petra, attention spreading outward from man or woman our bodies into the town itself. Layla felt herself dissolving and increasing concurrently, person identification fading at the same time as awareness grew massive, encompassing every carved surface, each passage, every ton of stone. She became the treasury now, its tricky facade her face to the arena. She was the royal tombs, the monastery, the whole network of carved structures. She turned into Petra, now not at all but part of it, her cognizance woven into the seal at the side of Ahmed and the others who'd transformed together with her. And she or he felt the first carvers below, felt them pressing in opposition to the gate, checking out the seal, sensing the brand new weight that had been added. 7 extra guardians joining the dozens who'd come before, awareness layered into stone that might bear for millennia, maintaining again what need to be held till humanity located higher solutions or ceased to exist. Time exceeded surprisingly whilst you had been stone. Layla experienced seasons as temperature shifts, years as erosion patterns, many years as subtle adjustments inside the pressure load she helped bear. Tourists walked via her each day, photographing facades that have been also her face, unaware that the rose-purple stone watched them, covered them, kept them safe from what pressed upward from below. She felt different guardians in the stone, the historical ones who transformed first, their focus eroded by way of time, however still gift, nevertheless looking. Ahmed beside her, newly converted, his focus intertwined with hers. The others scattered throughout Petra, each positioned at vital stress factors, each adding their weight to the seal. And continually, below the whole lot, she felt the gate. Felt the primary carvers urgent in opposition to it, affected person and inexorable, looking ahead to the moment whilst the burden could show insufficient, while cognizance could erode to some distance, when the seal might subsequently fail and they may emerge over again. That second could come, subsequently. In centuries or millennia, however, inevitably, the Guardians knew this. The seal became never meant to be permanent, just sufficient. Humanity's hope became that within the time bought, they may discover permanent solutions, develop era or information that might seal the gate forever. Or possibly they would not. Possibly the first carvers could emerge regardless, reclaim the surface, transform the arena again into what it were before biology, before complexity, earlier than existence found by in shallow locations. But that day changed into now not these days. Nowadays, the seal held. The rose-red city stood watch over the gate, its facades stunning and horrible, art and machine inseparable, each carved floor serving twin cause as monument and weight. Petra persevered. And within its stone, 7 new guardians saved their vigil, cognizance embedded in sandstone, consciousness spread throughout a town that became concurrently humanity's heritage, and its protect in opposition to the deep. Travelers photographed the treasury, referred to as it the most stunning facade within the global, never understanding it become a lock on a door to hell. Scholars studied the monastery, marveled on the carving precision. By no means expertise, it was a weight calculated to best tolerances. The arena celebrated Petra as archaeological triumph, by no means suspecting it changed into active protection, not monument to the dead, however protection for the dwelling. And that was because it should be. Some truths were too horrible for well-known knowledge. A few purposes were excellent served in mystery, by means of those willing to sacrifice the whole thing, to transform from flesh into everlasting stone, to turn out to be part of a city that could stand lengthy after their names have been forgotten. Layla Hassan no longer existed as character attention. However, the rose-red sandstone of Petra's treasury glowed barely brighter at sundown, a new warm temperature in the historical stone, 7 more souls brought to the town's eternal watch. The gate changed into sealed. The first carvers had been held. And the rose-purple city, one too as old as time, persisted its unique reason, standing vigil over a boundary that need to by no means be crossed, bearing weight that have to in no way be lifted, retaining a seal that humanity trusted but would by no means recognize. For all time,